Hey, do you teach yoga? Have you ever trained to lead yoga classes, to be a yoga therapist? Have you ever owned a yoga studio? Maybe even just wondered what it was like for the women and men up there in front of the room on their mats, leading you through endless Surya Namaskars, down dogs, and pranayamas galore? Well, these are their stories, and mine. I'm Rebecca Sebastian, a 20-year yoga teacher, 10-year yoga therapist, yoga studio owner, and co-founder of a yoga-focused nonprofit. I've done a lot in the yoga world over the last 20 years, pretty much everything except had a water cooler. You know, a place to share stories, talk about struggles, successes, and find other people who do the same thing that I do. Welcome to Working in Yoga, a podcast and substitute water cooler for yoga folks to connect and build community, to share our unique profession, our challenges, and our journeys with the world.
Hey friends, welcome to Working in Yoga. This week on the podcast is my second time interviewing the super rad Jivana Heyman, and boy do we have a dynamic conversation. There are few people who I talk about content like yoga organizations with who have a real and concrete idea of the kinds of things that they could be doing for us. Most people honestly are unsure of what they want a yoga org to do or be, but they know whatever's happening now isn't ideal. Now, that's perfectly fine by me. I definitely don't think that everyone should be as obsessed with this topic as I am. But wow, is it fun when I get to talk to someone who actually is. Jivana offers up some real truth about his experience dealing with organizations, what he has offered through accessible yoga in the past. Spoiler, there actually is someone in the modern yoga industry who made best practices for online teaching, and asks important questions about our futures with yoga organizations. I cannot wait for you to listen. But before we start, will you help me out by paying the algorithm tax and go ahead and like, subscribe, or follow the podcast from wherever you're listening? That helps the AI show our podcast to more cool yoga folks like you, and that means we have more opportunities to share and connect around the water cooler together. Now, let's talk all things yoga orgs with Jivana Heyman. Friends, welcome to Working in Yoga. Okay, so I've got Jivana Heyman on the podcast, and I feel like this is every time I record a podcast, we'll be like on the precipice of something so juicy. I'm like, wait, we got to stop and hit record. So, but before we start, Jivana, will you tell everybody who you are and what you do?
Sure. Hi, Rebecca. Thanks for having me again. I think it's
my second time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate you inviting me. And let's see, I'm Jivana, and I've founded Accessible Yoga organization, and we've been going through a lot of changes, which I can share if you're interested. But basically, we're an organization dedicated to serving yoga teachers and making yoga accessible, giving teachers the tools to do that. And that's what I like to do, support yoga teachers in any way that I can, and help train yoga teachers and share anything I can from my experience. I just mentioned before we started that next year it'll be 30 years that I've been teaching yoga. And so I just feel like I've been through a lot. And yeah, I just have a lot of, I don't know, like just time to reflect on yoga teaching in particular. Yeah.
Well, and originally when I pitched this podcast to you, it was because I want us to have a conversation about what we think our organization should be doing. Because I'm going to be honest with you, it's like you and me and Theo Wildcroft and maybe Leslie Kamenoff and two other people who really want to talk about how organizational structure works within our space.
Yeah.
And I want our conversations to kind of be out there so people can listen to them. But first, can you talk about your experience with accessible yoga and your experience with other organizations that we have within the industry? Because I feel like we need to know our history before we can figure out where we're going to go next.
Yeah, that's true. There's a lot of history. I mean, I don't want to be boring, but I can maybe make it short. A short history for accessible yoga is that, I started teaching that way back. I was an AIDS activist, and I was teaching yoga to people with HIV and AIDS, and they were showing me that they wanted something else, and that was, I started teaching in 1995, and that's when I was in the San Francisco Bay Area, and yoga studio culture was kind of just happening, especially in California, and yoga was really changing into something rather exclusive and confusing to me. And so I just, having a background in AIDS activism really helped me, because I don't know if people realize that being an activist means you're basically a community organizer,
Yep.
and that you like working with people and getting together with them and figuring out things like this, like what you do. I think a lot of what you're doing is activism. You don't have to use the word
Thanks.
or label.
I love that. I would consider it that too. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, just to be openly discussing the challenges that we're facing and looking at solutions, I think is what activists do. Sometimes people think of us as angry people, but I think activists are actually usually the most loving, caring, compassionate
Yes.
people who actually want to take care of people and see the world work for everyone and do a better job.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, so it was around, trying to think, in 2015, we had the first accessible yoga conference in person here. I had moved to Southern California. So in Santa Barbara, we had our first conference. And that was because I was looking for community. I had moved away from the Bay
Yeah.
Area. It's very lonely and isolated. And I thought other yoga teachers must feel this way, especially those of us that were not working in that studio world. And I knew
Yep.
I knew a lot of us were out there. And so the Accessible Yoga Conference was an effort to do that, to kind of just bring community together. And it was beautiful. I mean, it was a small group, but like really, really passionate, and really, we got really connected. And out of that, one thing that happened, well, we formed a nonprofit, actually. That's when the Accessible Yoga Association basically was formed. But also we created an advocacy team. And that team really was focused on Yoga Alliance, because at that time, Yoga Alliance was really disappointing. I don't know, like back then, it was like they just
Yeah.
200 hours and that was it. Yeah, it was.
I remember.
You do? Yeah.
Yeah.
It was really kind of sad. And so we started a campaign. We started petitioning them. We had a letter writing campaign. We reached out to board members. We really like started kind of harassing them and being like, you have to do better. You need to focus on accessibility and including those that are not being seen. And I have to say, just in general, that I think the role of these bureaucratic organizations is to do that. I mean, what other purpose is there to exist?
Right?
Speaking for those that don't have power, right?
Yes.
Like industry, the parts of the industry or the yoga world that have money, they don't need organizations. They don't need a yoga alliance. It's those of us who don't, right? It's for the individual teachers out there who are struggling to make a living, who are really trying to do their best job, and they're the ones who need support. So anyway, there was actually a really surprisingly strong response, and they ended up firing their CEO at the time. Yeah.
Okay.
And they did a search and they brought in David Lipsius, who you may
Yes, I remember.
know,
Yeah.
who has become a good friend of mine. He's really impressive. He surprised me. He came in and all of a sudden everything started changing there, and he started listening to people, and he invited me and a lot of other leaders of kind of grassroots organizations in yoga that were just out there trying to organize. And he started forming committees. There were committees around all the different issues that were of concern to Yoga Alliance. He created the current code of conduct that I helped contribute to, that I actually think is a really beautiful document that is not followed at any way, shape, or form by Yoga Alliance themselves or yoga teachers.
Yes.
And they also created a scope of practice, which didn't exist before. And anyway, he did a lot of work, but he was only there for about 2 years, and then he got burnt out and left. And, and since then, it's been stagnating. And I'll just say, I felt like there was a window of opportunity. And so I don't know if you want to talk about yoga therapy, but I just feel like I see a similar thing happening in the yoga therapy world right now. It seems like there's an opportunity right now for change. And so I would just be really vocal at this point about what you want and what the community of yoga therapists wants. But going back a little bit though, one more thing, then I'll stop. Just
I want you going forever.
Okay.
Go.
In 20, like I'd say it was about 2013. I started going to the IAYT meetings. They had the sitar conferences, and one of my mentors, Yanni Chapman, who passed away a few years ago, was the president of IAYT for a while, and I could see like so much potential there. I was thinking of myself as a yoga, I mean, I am a yoga therapist, and I kind
Yes.
of felt like that's the direction I was going with accessible yoga. But then when I attended that meeting, the first meeting of the IAYT, I was really taken aback. And I thought, wow, this isn't at all what I think we need to be doing. They were
Yeah.
almost 100% focused on bringing yoga into healthcare, to the point where it felt like they were letting go of essential elements of yoga practice. That shocked me. It really shocked me.
Yes.
It felt dangerous, actually. And it seemed unnecessary. I don't know. It just, I don't, there were people walking around in the white lab coats, yoga teachers, kind of as yoga therapists, with prescription pads of asanas. And I'm like,
Okay.
what? I'm like, what are we doing? Why does yoga have to become part of a system that doesn't even work? You know what I mean? Like, that's because my
Yep.
experience as an AIDS activist was very much focusing on the fact that healthcare wasn't serving people. And so then to see yoga being brought into that world was a little devastating for me. And so I decided I didn't really want anything to do with IAYT. And actually, that's when I thought we're going to have our own conference, because this is not the world for me. And by the way, the other thing IAYT had not done, they were just putting together the standards back then for what would become, yoga therapy educational standards. And I was, because at that time I worked for Integral Yoga, and I was helping to put together Integral Yoga's yoga therapy program, which I contributed to a lot with a great group of people. But anyway, it had nothing about the dying process, about grieving or death at all, included in the standards for training for yoga therapists
Yeah.
at that time. I don't know if that's changed, but I was just like totally shocked. I was like, what?
It has not.
No, like it was so focused on this idea of healing. And I think healing is an aspect of yoga, but it's not really what yoga is for, right? It's for
Yeah.
maybe spiritual healing, but not physical healing. Is kind of like a byproduct, mostly, my understanding of yoga. So I don't know. It was really, really disappointing.
Yeah, I mean, I find it really interesting that you sort of went through the same process with the yoga lines because actually, I mean, again, we could talk about their stagnation now because I think they're kind of stagnant as an org right now, but
Exactly.
to
Yeah.
see them decide to shift and change. This is the thing that I just keep looking at the IYT, which, I mean, I think they probably think I'm their biggest asshole, maybe their second biggest asshole, but that's fine. I like it makes me laugh because part of it is that I feel really strongly that they need to be held accountable for the mess that they've made because they've made a real fumble on the play, if you want to use sports terms or whatever. They've really made a mess and they need to clean it up. Instead, they're just sitting there going, well, what do you want us to do? And I was like, well, I feel like I'm pretty clear about this. I want your board to democratize. I want you to be transparent. And I want you to pick up the pieces of the shit that you broke.
Yeah.
Do you think that the Yoga Alliance did some of that when they
Oh, yeah.
shifted? Can they have modeled this for the IYT? Can we just
Yes
send
and
them
no.
a
I think what we saw, I mean, this is just my perspective, because by the way, I'm the asshole of Yoga Alliance. Like, they can't stand me.
oh
They won't
yay.
speak to me. They refuse to include me in anything because I openly criticize them. And so that actually is the issue. I mean, it really is the heart of it. It's not me personally, but
Yes.
it's
Yes.
what happens to organizations. And I think especially kind of in the nonprofit yoga world, it seems
Mhm.
like once you become established and you have funding or something, there's a certain, and I think it's maybe human nature, there's a certain like insulation that begins to occur, or like and a stagnation and a kind of getting frozen in time where you actually
Yeah.
consolidate power. And that's what I think has happened at Yoga Alliance since David left, which is that the focus there is
Yeah.
consolidating power. There's no reason for them to change. They're all getting paid well, you know.
Yes.
They don't see a problem. And what's happened, unfortunately, is that they become good at they've learned from the past, and they use like the messaging of the community and the catchphrases. Like a lot of the stuff
Yes.
that Accessible Yoga did, Yoga Alliance, I think, learned from us, which I mean, I think is great. I mean, I appreciate that they did a lot of the things
Sure.
asked them to, but they did it in a very small scale. And like
Yeah.
I could give you like probably 5 examples if you want to get into that later, like things I actually
I
did.
do.
But what is so shocking is how they did them so small. And mostly it's just like, you know what I mean? Like, for example, I mean, we have accessible yoga. We just actually closed our nonprofit side this year because
Yeah.
funding was not there for us. Our annual budget was like something like $130,000 after, you know, being around for years and years and years. We just didn't have funding. And yet I feel like we offered pretty much equal amount of service while we were functioning that Yoga Alliance is offering. And here you have an organization with maybe like $30 million that they have
Yep.
in the bank, and or like assets, I should say. Maybe they don't have that in the bank, but they have a lot of money and a lot of power and a lot of authority, and they offer incredibly small amount of actual service. So I guess what I'm saying is, yes, I think it's a time for change. They will, I think bringing in new leadership is exactly what IAYT can do right now. And it looks like they're going to do that. And I hope it's someone that's a good listener and they can bring, you know, this is
Same.
the moment of transformation. But I would say, like, what happens in a few years from now, we can't tell. But that's Yoga Alliance is in a place where they made that transition. Beautiful things happened, and then they got stuck again.
Yeah. So, okay. Ooh, I have a lot of things that I want to ask you, but first I want to, like, what are the things that you suggested that the Yoga Alliance did that could have been on a larger scale, but they did sort of the like movie theater size popcorn, small size of it, you know? Like,
Well, a lot of it happened during COVID. I think we saw some changes. It was a crisis, you know, because at that
yeah.
time when COVID started, yoga teachers were like everyone, but yoga teachers were really in trouble because our normal teaching wasn't really available to us. So they looked for stuff and they did some things. Some of it we had already started at Accessible Yoga. We started having weekly like community meetings. We had public conversations, community conversations where either me or someone else from our board would talk to some yoga teacher that's active in the community about what are they doing? How are they transitioning to this new world and work? And part of that effort, we literally put together guidelines for online teaching. We put together, Amber Carnes was the leader or president at the time of our board, and she put together this incredible document that was community driven. Like, it was a document that people just added to, that was like how to teach online. Because even though these days we're so used to that, it was like a really new thing for a lot of us. So that was
You
incredible.
guys did best practices for online?
Yes, we created an incredible document through Amber, and it was so beautiful and helpful. We also offered a scholarship program. So we began offering scholarship for marginalized folks to attend teacher training, because it felt to us that the issue was that what's happening in yoga is there's a lack of representation among teachers. This is even worse in yoga therapy, by the way, but in yoga teaching, it's
Yep.
also an issue. And the way to address that is to train people from marginalized communities to become teachers themselves. So put them in leadership positions. So we, Accessible Yoga, created grants where we gave money. We gave $1,000 to people to take a 200-hour training because the cost is usually prohibitive.
Yeah.
Yoga Alliance copied that on a very small scale, even though they have so much money. That could have been huge. I think that could have been a huge thing. We ended up doing free webinars at least a few times a month. I know now it's like, of course, but like we were offering free training basically for yoga teachers, like how to around any issue, like around teaching, and offering these as basically a free resource to our community, which then Yoga Alliance started to do. They started to have all these free webinars. I actually led some of them even for Yoga Alliance when we were still talking. Because by the way, Yoga Alliance funded us in the beginning. They actually, after working with David, you know, we were getting money to run our conferences and to offer scholarships, which I really appreciated. So I don't mean to just be all down on them. It's just that the funding dried up. And all of a sudden they said they're not funding other organizations, they're doing it all themselves. But their messaging began to mimic ours in many ways, like including, yeah. So anyway, yeah.
Please note for the listener, Jeevan is laughing at Rebecca's facial expressions.
I
I am
mean,
not good at keeping a still face.
you know, I mean, I'm speaking about this openly because I think it's important to talk about it. I'm sure they're going to be very mad at me for doing that. I'm happy to talk to them privately, but they refuse. I don't think they're interested in my feedback. And I just think that it's a shame because they exist to serve yoga teachers. And that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about ways that the organization, Yoga Alliance is literally our main, I don't know what you want to call it, trade organization, or if that's what
they are legally a trade organization.
legally, yeah, to represent us. And I just don't think they're doing it. I think they're doing little tiny pieces. So I get that they're trying, but I feel like they need to really be creative and consider potential that they have such a huge potential impact there. But they're happy, I think, with the status quo and the status quo, and that's not okay with me. It's just not.
It can't possibly be okay with any of us. This is the same issue that the IAYT faces, right? Because one of the things I'm lobbing at them is that have people who are $15,000 into their yoga professional education versus a teacher, you're coming in at $2,500, I think is probably right around industry standard, some more, some less. But if you're a yoga therapist, you've spent a lot of money on your education. And they did research that Dr. Stephanie Munoz came on my podcast and she said, "You want to know what it said? The average yoga therapist makes $13,000 a year." Like,
Yeah.
we can't be like, that's cool.
Yeah.
We're too poor as an industry to be
Yeah.
okay with this.
It doesn't make sense to me. There's some basic something not working in yoga, and I don't know
Yeah.
what it is. Even though I've been in this world for so long, I think it's like a lot of things. There's a consolidation of power,
Yeah.
and I think a lack of generosity. It just feels like people who have resources tend to hoard them. And then there's so many people out there who just want to make it work. They want to teach, they want to make a living, and it's almost impossible. I mean, I actually know very few yoga teachers that are able to make a living. Almost all yoga teachers I know, well, like Theo wrote that article that you were
Yep. Yes.
discussing, and she mentioned you and me. It's like, most yoga teachers have to have another source of income or a partner who has money. It's
Yep.
almost impossible, and it just doesn't make sense to me. I don't understand it. I don't know why. And I feel like Yoga Alliance could do some work on that topic alone, just to really reflect on what could they do to actually support yoga teachers. And I wonder if that's their goal, because that's the other thing. I actually question who their membership really is. I feel like they're kind of trying to cover all their bases, meaning
Yep.
that I think that they think they represent all aspects of the yoga world, and that's almost impossible to do, meaning they think they represent, schools and big yoga companies and individual teachers and yoga students. And like, I don't know if you can do all that. I'm not sure that really is very effective, right? And I think the person who gets
Yeah.
lost in that is the yoga teacher, who I think is the key to this whole thing, actually, is the yoga teacher.
I actually think everybody gets lost in that thing. To be honest, I've said this probably 1,000 times at this point. I think both IYT and the Yoga Alliance have scope of practice issues.
Okay,
Like,
there you go.
you can't claim to represent the teachers, the students, the schools in the studios, in the Yoga Alliance's case, and say that you're doing that job well, because the best needs of all of those organizations are not congruent. Like,
Yeah.
the best needs of the students are certainly not the same as the best needs of the schools.
Hmm.
And you can't claim to be an accrediting body and also represent the workers within the industry, because the needs of those two groups are not the same.
Yeah.
And I mean, it is funny. And then the the IYT is doing the exact same thing on a scale where the buy-in for being a participant within the organization is 4 times what the Yoga Alliance's buy-in is.
Yeah.
That's just cuckoo banana pants. Like, you
Yeah.
can't say that's a good idea.
So the reason, I don't, just as an aside, I think we have to look at where their money is coming from. I mean, maybe not aside, maybe that's the point,
Yeah.
actually, is like, how are they existing? And I think that's unfortunately what they focus on as well, is looking for sources of income. And so by
Yes.
covering all these bases, they can actually get money from all the sources. At Accessible Yoga, the reason that we ended up failing financially is because of that problem.
Yeah.
We only wanted to support yoga teachers. We were willing for studios to become members as well, but really only if they would support their teachers. And we also weren't forcing anyone to pay us. Like, we didn't say, I think if you create standards because that's what people recommended I do in the beginning. People recommended that I create accessible yoga standards that then would become like a
Yeah.
certification. And I do a yoga certification, but to do like a certification for teachers or businesses to say they are accessible yoga certified and to actually hold that up as some kind of gold standard, which then people would have to pay for. And I
Yep.
just didn't really want to do that. I didn't want to become like another body like that that's forcing people to pay them money, because I think advocating is more powerful. I wanted to be that voice just for the individual teacher rather than kind of like the person making rules for them.
Yeah, I'll be honest, I'm not interested in making rules either. Like
Yeah,
partially that just seems like work that doesn't light me up. And also I feel like maybe you believe the same thing. I don't think that's where I'm best serving
yeah,
us. Like you kind of like if you have enough of a say, at some point you have to step back and be like, where am I best of service? At least that's what I'm doing is going, where am I going to slide into this whole picture? And to me, the thing that lights me up is figuring out how we can redistribute the power within the industry, how we can take the collective and mass our voices together so we can leverage what we need for the organizations who are in charge of our futures.
yes. And there are organizations. I mean, it's our money. So I mean, that is
Right.
membership funding, that is keeping them afloat and paying their salaries. And I feel like maybe that's where the real issue is that there's a lack of representation or a lack of responsibility to the people that are actually paying. Why isn't there
Yeah.
community oversight? Why isn't there, like you said, like a democratic process, right? Like,
Mhm.
it seems like, for example, at Yoga Alliance, you have a problem with, I think, with the leadership, where they're very stagnant and stuck. But the board, which supposedly is overseeing them, is handpicked by them. So they're handpicking their board. So of course they're going to choose people that agree with them. There's not going to be any
Yes.
tension there. And I understand that's human nature. You don't want to have to deal with any issues, but
Yeah.
it feels like there needs to be a community oversight.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. So the IYT and the Yoga Alliance actually have fundamentally different governances, which I
Yeah.
just found out a couple months ago. And I gasped so loud. My daughter came in and was like, Mom, what's the matter? And like that, because the Yoga Alliance is a 501(c)(6), which is a trade organization, which means they're very accountable to their membership. That's the
Yeah.
literal point of them. The IYT is not. So they're a public 501(c)(3), which I think is what Accessible Yoga was too,
Yeah.
but they're accountable to the public and to the mission. So we have even less say in that. And I mean, whether or not they're doing that legally or they know the problems of that, I'm not going to say. I mean, but I will look judgingly at you over my glasses, IYT, because I feel like you
Yeah.
know better.
By the way, Yoga Alliance has two organizations. They're that
Yes.
trade organization. They're also the foundation, which has shifted from actual official foundation status to nonprofit status. Foundation status was
Really?
a different form of nonprofit status that demands you give away a certain percentage of your money every year. You have to give
Yeah.
away at least 5% of your funds to become a foundation. But they use the word foundation, but they're no longer an actual foundation, at least as of a few years ago. And they're not giving away money to that extent. They're not giving away the correct amount of money. So by becoming a regular nonprofit, they're actually more free to do what they want. And by the way, that I think is also a place where the public and yoga teachers really need to look carefully at the foundation and ask, what are they doing with that money, and why isn't it be given away? They will give away a tiny little bit to a few places here and there, and then they just keep it to themselves. I don't know why. Like, what are they hoarding it for? I mean, especially when yoga
So,
teachers are in need. Like, I think we need support, you know?
yeah. Okay. Okay. So, okay. Are you serious?
Yeah. As far as I
So,
know, and I could be wrong, but I believe they changed their status when they did a real, actually David is part of the, you should have David on here. Um, I think he'd be willing to talk to you. He's the one who made these changes there legally, turning it into a trade
yeah.
organization. But also, I believe the foundation became a nonprofit. And that, I could be wrong about my history, but I believe that's what they did, which freed them up to not have to follow
Yes.
those rules. Yeah,
So then they're taking the money from the C6, funneling it to the C3, and then just sitting on it?
pretty much. I mean, they have,
Huh.
according to GuideStar, which is a public,
Yes.
guide
Yes.
to nonprofits. I did a search a few months ago, and they had like something like $30 million assets together, the two organizations, which are really one organization because both organizations are under the same CEO and the same board. So the fact is they're really one organization.
The same board, even?
Yeah, the same board and the same CEO oversees both of these organizations. I don't know how they get away with it, but there's no real separation between them that I know of.
And just, God, how naive am I? Like, I don't know. I should not be shocked at this point because so much nonsense has come up with this
Yeah,
IYT
it's a lot
stuff
of
that
nonsense.
I should not be shocked anymore. But I had just assumed, being a person of the nonprofit world myself, that the foundation, or now nonprofit side of it, had their own governance board.
I mean, perhaps they do, and I could be incorrect. I would actually call on them to speak about it publicly. I actually think they've really done a disservice by doing a lot of this in hiding. I think there's very little community oversight. They have public information that they release that's delayed. So they produce
Yes,
annual reports, usually at least 2 years later. So you
yes.
actually don't get to really see what's going on in real time. They also, the way those reports are produced, in my opinion, is incredibly slick, and it's marketing, where they talk about the work they're
I've
doing,
read
lots of
them.
pretty
Yes,
pictures. Yeah.
yes,
I mean, it's kind of the danger in a lot of the nonprofit world. It's not just yoga, I hate to say. I mean, I do think there's a
yeah.
lot of this happening where nonprofits end up just becoming just other kinds of business entities. They kind of lose their connection to their ultimate mission. And I think it's because people, and again, it's human nature that the people in charge want regular income. They want a consistent living themselves. They don't want change. They don't want chaos. So they get stuck in these jobs, and then they kind of just want to stay there, and they do what they can to keep it going without really reflecting on the outcome. And I do think Yoga Alliance does some good things, but it's very little, I think, compared to the size of what their resources are. Their capacity is huge, and the actual impact is tiny, like
Yeah.
absolutely tiny. And like I said, I think accessible yoga had an equal impact with a budget that was probably, I don't know, a hundredth the size, like literally, like just tiny budget. So I think it takes very little to make some change there. I do know there's some people working at Yoga Alliance who are really trying, and so I don't mean to call them all out. I mean,
Mm.
I think individually they're probably all great people. I just think it's a more of a, yeah,
That's generous.
structural problem.
I mean, look, okay, so I have two very distinct thoughts about all of these organizations. One is that they're led by people who are not us,
Hmm.
frankly. I mean, I think it's a huge problem that the leadership in all organizations that I am a part of in the US, Yoga Alliance and the IAYT, the leadership are making decisions by people who've never had our jobs, by people who've never had to pay their bills, doing what we have to do to pay our bills, and they get to decide our future.
I
And
agree.
fuck that in its entirety.
I agree. I think it's bizarre. It is actually bizarre to me that the leaders of these two organizations, the ones at least currently there, neither of them are yoga teachers or yoga therapists. It doesn't make any sense to me. Why is
And
that?
have never been.
They've never been. I believe they both practice yoga from what they've told me, and that's
That
great. And
ain't
I
the
know that they have a lot
same.
of people around them who are yoga teachers and yoga therapists, but I don't think it's the same thing. I think that's a good point. I think we need new leadership at both these organizations. I know that's happening already at IAYT. I mean, I appreciate Alyssa and what she tried to do there. I think
Yeah.
Shannon Roach at Yoga Alliance also has really tried, but I think it's time for new leadership. I think we need change. I think that yoga teachers are suffering and they're not getting supported in the way they need it. And I'm afraid it's going to get worse, I have to say, with the changes that are come with our new administration in the next 4 years and how I think the economy is going to be stressed. I think yoga teachers are going to be in a real bind, especially those of us that really are trying to make a living. Like, I mean, it's fine if you teach once a week for free or whatever. Like that
Yeah.
probably, I mean, probably you have another source of income. But if you rely on this work for your living to eat and feed your family and house yourself, I just feel like you need support. And that's what these organizations are supposed to do. And why aren't we asking them to do it? Why isn't there a public outcry? Why aren't people concerned that they're hoarding resources, I think, especially Yoga Alliance, and not actually offering any service to us? I just don't understand.
I want to circle back to what you just said about what's about to happen in the next 4 years,
Yeah.
because I mean, as you know, I run a studio. I have a team of people. I have yoga therapists who work for me. I have yoga teachers who work for me. And already we're sitting here looking at that going, those tariffs that are about to come from Canada and Mexico, like they're going to make life so much more expensive, which means things that are considered extras are cut. That just isn't good for us. Like, so we're going, okay, what can we do? How do we make ourselves like more poignant in people's brains? Like, you're right. We're gonna need support in these next 4 years, like we haven't since March 15th, 2020. I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've seen a shift in my student base. I teach a lot online mostly these days, and I see again, I'm getting a lot more international students. I think that's been interesting, and I actually think I think it might be easier to make a living in other countries as a yoga teacher. I'm getting that
Yep,
feeling. I think it's
same.
American teachers who are struggling right now and who will be, especially like you said, in the next 4 years. So I don't know what the answer is. I just know that we need help. And I think that's what both of us are trying to say. I think people will be angry at us for this conversation and probably for everything that we do. But I also think they need to hear something else in what we're saying, which is this
Yeah,
cry for help. I really want to speak for people who don't have a platform. I mean, I I think
same.
the yoga teachers out there who are really just trying their best, they really need support, and I don't see it coming. I think to just make them pay into an organization without really providing them. I mean, what do you give them in exchange? You give them a discount on some clothing company or a discount on insurance. I mean, I
Oh
think
my
I
God.
could think of a million things you could do for them. I would say you could offer them free training. You could give them continuing education to actually help to do better at their job. You could give them legal support. And I know that there's some tiny efforts to do that, but I think yoga teachers need support with things like liability insurance. Like, what do you really need and how to use it? Um, waivers. Why not give them like sample waivers that they
Templates.
can use, templates that they
Yep.
can use that you've had legal people review, rather than force yoga teachers to do this kind of unknown thing, like to be lawyers or like try to find legal advice for free. Do that for them, like provide waivers. It could be almost, it's so easy to do. Similarly, I think there's issues around, I had so many ideas. Let me think. I have other things we could do. There's, legally alone, how about contracts? How about helping yoga teachers learn how to read a contract, how to write a contract, give them sample contracts, tell them what to avoid signing in a contract? I
Yes.
still get into situations where I'm having to read through these contracts when I work for someone, and I don't even know half the things that these things say. And it's like, do I have to find legal support for that? It's too expensive and seems
Yes.
unnecessary. I think I noticed that sometimes there'll be an announcement around some legal thing coming from Yoga Alliance, but why not actually create a structure to make it easy for them to find that information? Like, is there a number I can call to get information about like legal advice because I have a membership at either of these organizations? Um, and
I
then
can think of, oh,
yes, I have
go
more
ahead.
ideas. No,
I
go
was going
ahead.
to say, I could think of two legal things that have happened in the last year that the Yoga Alliance has said nothing about.
Yeah.
One, the quick to cancel membership situation, because that
Mhm.
affects us as an industry. And the second is now you cannot legally, in all 50 states, sign a non-compete clause as a yoga
Yeah.
teacher in a studio. And how have they not told anybody that? I told, like, I am not your secret keeper, friends. I tell
Yeah.
everybody everything.
I mean, I think there was an article in a newsletter from them maybe about it that I saw, but I would just say that's not enough. I think there needs to be
No.
more information. I actually signed a contract recently that still had kind of like the wording around non-compete in it. That was just shocking to me. It was from a pretty big yoga organization. I'm like, you're still doing this? It's actually not even legal. Like, you can't ask someone to sign that anymore.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that's a great example. I don't understand that. And both of those issues need to be addressed. I don't know why there isn't. Why not hire someone and have them give a free webinar on that topic that all the membership can attend, and then you have the recording available as well. You can create a document that gives people guidelines to follow regarding any of this stuff. They should be doing, I don't know, every few months there should be up-to-date like legal memo regarding what do yoga teachers need to know about what's happening right now. And not just legal. I think it could be done in a few other areas, which is what I was trying to get at before. I think legal is a huge one, but I also think there's a few others. Bookkeeping and accounting is an area where I think yoga teachers need help. And again, I see an occasional article about it, but I think why not actually set up tax support for yoga teachers or yoga therapists to actually be able to just look at one document that explains it all so you know what to do when you're preparing your taxes. Also around marketing, why not have best practices around marketing? What do yoga teachers or yoga therapists need to be doing? And what ideas could you offer them to help them with marketing support that would be so useful? I mean, I do a lot of marketing because that's what I've learned I have to do. And I think it's such a huge part of yoga teaching, and you expect yoga teachers to know how. There's two kinds of marketing, I think. There's the marketing that happens kind of personally regarding yoga teachers through their networking and collaboration and assisting other teachers and subbing and all that. But then there's also classic or traditional marketing, which is even more complex. Advertising, content marketing, social media, email marketing. I just feel like there's so much support they could offer to yoga teachers in that regard. Literally, I don't get why there isn't an ongoing, like, monthly report from Yoga Alliance about yoga teachers. Are you doing this for your marketing? Here's some ideas, right? Here's some, I could think of ideas. I could think of a million ideas for yoga teachers. Anyway, that's just things off the top of my head. I think there are just endless other things. Oh, because the other thing is Yoga Alliance in particular, I think could look at what could we do regarding teacher pay and look at the role of unions. And I know that Yoga Alliance isn't a union, but I feel like there has to be, if you're going to be speaking for yoga teachers, you have to look at what a union would do. How would you support yoga teachers in really learning how to ask for their best pay possible?
Yep.
Right. I think that's a whole conversation. I don't know. I don't see that happening. How much are people charging? And what kind of agreements are they asking? Like, how are you getting paid? Because that's the other thing. It's not just, payment usually isn't these days just like an hourly rate. There's other parts. Are you getting paid per head? Are you getting a percentage? Are you an affiliate? It's like there's so many complex little pieces that go into, do you get royalties? What happens when you do free marketing and you put stuff on YouTube? How do you get paid for that? It's like there's so much to getting paid as a yoga teacher these days that I feel like it's like this just, I don't know, cloud of confusion. And why aren't we getting help with that? Like, it's not hard. There's people out there who know the answers.
I mean, so can I add on top of that three
Yes.
other things that I want to talk about?
Please.
One is that why are they not hosting community conversations? And
Yes,
this is
there
my
you go.
beef. Like, I really freaking love talking to people. This is my jam. But like, why am I doing it? Why?
Exactly. Why did I do it?
Why is it me? Like, so because we're lonely. As an industry, we're lonely. It's an isolating job. We don't have a lot of friends. A lot of friends that we have in our communities, we also see as competition, and that becomes sort of like soul sucking also.
Yeah.
Second, could we get healthcare? That'd be great. If we could all
Woo!
buy into healthcare, that'd be fucking fantastic. Could we talk about retirement for a second so that we don't have to do this job? And instead we've pedestaled teachers who teach until they're 97 years old. Like, I mean, and I love that for them.
Yeah.
Like, well, Sam, we have no choice.
I didn't know.
But I would
my
love
retirement
a choice.
plan is to teach into my 90s.
Like, could we talk about that too? Like, there's too much good that we're doing in the world for us to not be like, how are we supporting the people who are doing this work? It's insane that we're the only people asking this question.
I know. Another part I would say around yoga business is literally just like, how do you what models are you using for a yoga business? I just feel like there's so many options these days and a lot of confusion around it. Like what is your business model? Do you have a business plan? And like, there's a lot of business training, I think, that we don't get, just like how to be in business, because you are a business person when you're a yoga teacher. And I just feel like I've had to learn so much on the job. It's like I'm an accountant, I'm an advertising executive, I'm a lawyer. I'm a business managing and marketing expert. I mean, it's unbelievable what I've had to learn, and it's unnecessary. Like, there's so much that I personally could tell people. I mean, my last book, I basically tried to put a lot of it in there about, Teacher's Guide to Accessible Yoga, a lot of thoughts around how to teach accessible yoga. But there's like, I could write another book that I wouldn't really be like the right person to write, because I'm guessing. Like, this is what I think we do for marketing. This is what I think I do legally. This is what I think I do business wise. And also, I'm curious to talk to yoga teachers who are successful. I'd like to know how are you being successful? What is working for you? Like, I think the model is shifting, is kind of what I'm getting at too. Like, wouldn't it be fun to hear success stories and learn from that, like mentors? Yeah.
Can we do a book like Theo and Harriet did, where we just get a bunch of people to contribute, but we're only talking about yoga business?
I mean, I don't have the patience for it, because I just feel like that's the part I'm tired of, but someone should do that. I know that there's a few books like that, but I feel like it's more like the role of a big organization. Honestly, to me, that's like something it should be, again, a monthly newsletter, or like a committee. There could be committees. Okay, if I was running Yoga Alliance, I would create committees for each of these topics that we've addressed. There would be a committee that was made up of like 1 or 2 people from the board of Yoga Alliance or the staff, and then the rest are community members who have some expertise or experience in this area. And it would be a real mixture of people from all over the world. And I think have these committees offer public meetings where they would present and then have questions from the audience. And this could be done on Zoom. It could happen every month. There could be a meeting of each of these committees, and you could have a committee on everything, on marketing, on accounting, and taxes. You could have one on business models and strategy, and one on retirement and pay. I mean, there's just so many topics we could have. And I think it could be flexible and fluid. It wouldn't have to be like existing forever, but while the issues are there, you could have some, like you said, a community conversation focused on a topic.
Yep. So, okay. So here's what I think we need to do. I have a new plan. We need to be bigger assholes for the community.
I'm pretty big.
Like, same. But I do think that there's also space for a true public call to democratize these organizations, so we get a say. Like, I think now's the time. I think from all accounts and rumors, we've pushed the IAYT in that direction really strongly. Like, that may actually happen.
Yes, by the way, thank you. I just want to say to you that I think you were really behind this. I think that I know that you had a little support, but I really felt your voice. I heard your voice very strongly around IAYT. And I don't know if people are aware of that, listening to your podcast, the role that you've had. I don't know if you are just being, I don't know if you don't want to talk about that, but I just feel like it's worth taking credit. You did a great job. And I know you had support. Amy Wheeler was really involved with that, but I just feel like I could hear you in that conversation, just like call out to IAYT regarding new standards they were creating without community input, to what they were trying to do is certify healthcare professionals in a kind of a short training to become yoga therapists. And they didn't really let anyone know that was happening. So thanks for dealing with that.
Yeah, well, thank you for saying that. I appreciate that, because it's been, look, I think you and I are aligned. I just love us. I don't know why I've never found a group of people on the planet I feel more attuned to than yoga professionals, for whatever messed up reason that says about me.
I do too. I love yoga people, yoga teachers, and yoga therapists, and that's what I'm here for. I mean, what I think it's funny, because I think I'm like on the other side of this from you. Like, in a way, I feel like I'm kind of done with doing it myself. Like, I spent basically my whole career trying to do this, and I just kind of got burnt out. And what I found I was doing is I was just raising money. I mean, so much of my time was spent on fundraising for accessible yoga, because it wasn't a good financial model. There isn't a model out there to support this work. And I just got so burnt out from it. So, and I just gone back to teaching more and writing, which is what inspires me. And so I'm really happy to not be the one doing that anymore. I mean, you're still in the fight. I am just kind of on the outside criticizing, but I would say it's the people who have the resources who also therefore have the responsibility. And I'm tired of them not taking that responsibility. If you're getting paid from a yoga organization, you have a responsibility to do your job, and to say otherwise and to blame anyone who's criticizing you is complete garbage. And it's unethical. It's truly unethical.
Yeah.
If you're running a yoga organization, you have the responsibility to really listen to the community and to be responsive to their concerns. That is literally your job, actually.
Yes.
So for them to call us assholes or to complain about our criticism is actually that it's a dereliction of their duties. It's actually it's them becoming stagnant and, like, I would say dangerous in a sense. It reminds me of what happens in politics. I mean, I hate to go into politics, but if we look at like the Democratic Party, I think has been like a real disappointment because sure, like the ethics are there supposedly, like they hold these values that seem correct, but they don't actually really implement them. And I think people we're not inspired by that, right? We're just feeling a little bit like jaded, maybe. Like, okay, you can't just say the words, you actually have to do the action. And I feel like that's where we are. I feel like that's where we are with like Yoga Alliance is you can't just say the word accessibility and equity and then that's it, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think yes. Now, so here's how I think things are shaking out now is that we just burned as an industry in 2020, and there's so many fewer of us here, and those of us who are here now have been through a thing. So if we can come together and be like, look, I am still here, and our job is to hold these organizations accountable for their jobs. Like, this isn't my job to fix the IAYT any more than it's your job to fix the Yoga Alliance. Like, I already have a job. I actually have like 6 jobs, that's being one of them. So I just need you to do your job and to do it well enough that I would hire you at my studio. That's what I keep saying to the IAYT. I'm like, I looked at the IYT and I was like, I wouldn't hire any of you. I mean, my standards are pretty high for who I hire, but that said, like, I don't think any of you would have made it past the first round. So get better, or we're going to force you to do it.
Yeah, I think do your job. I mean, your job is a job of service. I think it's probably thankless. I recognize that, but I feel like if you're getting a decent pay, which you are,
paycheck isn't thankless.
No, it's a paycheck, and that's your thanks. And then you have to really, really challenge yourself and reflect on how much more can I do? I mean, yoga is about service ultimately, and I think rather than demand service of yoga teachers, we need to demand the service of the organizations that are supposedly supporting us.
Yes. Jivana, will you tell everybody where to find you?
They can find me. I don't know. I'm everywhere. No, I don't know. I'm on Instagram a lot at Jivana Heyman or at Accessible Yoga, and on let's see, jivanaheyman.com, or we're still using accessibleyogaschool.com. You know, we have lots of trainings. I have to say, I mean, for me personally, like, it's fun to go back down this journey with you, and I appreciate that. At the same time, I'm just like so happy that I'm not running a nonprofit anymore and I can just teach. And honestly, like, I think that's the part that really fills me up. And you know, and so I want to support yoga teachers, but the way I'm doing it now is just trying to offer them any experience that I've had, like just through training yoga teachers and writing about teaching yoga. That's basically my thing. So I hope it's useful. Yeah.
Well, one of my teachers is going through one of your trainings right now, and she loves it. Loves it, loves it, loves it.
Great. Wow. I'm so glad to hear that. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you for having this conversation.
Yeah. Thanks, Rebecca. Thanks for everything you do.
Thank you so, so much for this conversation, Jivana. Here are our key takeaways. First, the point of an organization, any organization, is to speak for those who have less power. Jivana put that beautifully. If you are a nonprofit organization that takes membership dues, even if your status doesn't explicitly state that you are for the members, What is the point of you if you don't speak up for us who have less power than you? Next, please watch for orgs, any org, but including yoga organizations who are consolidating power within their ranks. When we have fewer and fewer people with more and more of a say, that is a key sign that things are not functioning properly in an organization. Next, Accessible Yoga did best practices for online teaching. I just need to repeat that as something that I find insane to me, that the Yoga Alliance or the IAYT has not set forth best practices for the industry in regards to online teaching. This is going to be critical for us in the very near future as we look at a lot more of our work going online in the next 5 to 10 years. Have you been thinking about online and tech and AI? Because I have. Next, I will say this now probably until I die, because it won't change until then. The Yoga Alliance and the IAYT have scope of practice issues. What is best for yoga practitioners and yoga schools are not the same. What is best for yoga therapists in practice and best for yoga therapy schools are definitely not the same. So please, please, please sort out your scope of practice issues. Next, Jivana shared some operational things about the Yoga Alliance that I find so staggeringly awful. The Yoga Alliance is allegedly taking money from their dues and funneling it into another organization that they also run that has tax-free status. To keep you up to date, 501c6 organizations, which are trade organizations, are not necessarily tax-free in the same way that other nonprofit organizations are. And each org has the same board and CEO. Talk about a conflict of interest. And honestly, what you need with all that money, Yoga Alliance? Like, seriously, tell us what's going on, boo. Next, let's figure out how to support each other in the next 4 years, especially if you're in the United States. By all accounts, things are looking dicey for us as an industry that exists in most people's extra bucket of their budgets. When people have less money that's extra to spend, we tend to see our numbers dip. So how are we going to support each other and get through what will likely be a difficult period for our businesses? And finally, I want to share a few of the ideas that Jivana gave forth about what an org could be offering its members. Free training, heavily discounted continuing education, legal support, liability insurance, waivers and contracts, more information and data about our industry, ideas and things about marketing, the role of supporting unions. These are just some of the things that they could be doing. If any org was doing this, they'd absolutely have my money. Now, next week is a final wrap up for this series on yoga organizations and our future. And then I'm sliding into a whole new series on the podcast about a topic that has been kind of burrowing in my brain for the last couple months: AI, tech, and yoga. I want to talk with folks about how we use tech, how AI will shape and change us in the future, what won't change, and we even have the coolest conversation coming about yoga, AI, and philosophy. I cannot wait for you to hear it. Until then, my friends, thank you so much for sharing your time and attention with me. I'm so very grateful. I will catch you around the water cooler next time.